Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Mike Malaret. He's the Director of Sales Engineering for Public Sector at Veritas Technologies. So Mike, the Army's tasked with managing a lot of data, a lot of mission critical data that they're moving toward the cloud, and they're trying to manage and protect this as that data grows. How can the Army keep pace with the complexity that's coming with cloud and also keep costs down at the same time?
Yeah, thank you. When you consider moving applications and data into the cloud, right? Typically, we refer to the data being moved into the cloud, but we pretend to forget the application usually has to go with it, right? It's very important that you leverage technologies that are going to be able to give you a comprehensive data protection strategy for being able to restore from within that individual cloud, or be able to restore to another cloud, or even be able to restore back on-prem, right? What we've seen with some of the quote born in the cloud solutions is they don't necessarily scale in a cost-effective way in order to bring the most efficiency to the government. And I think it's important that they look at standardization and cost effectiveness versus on-prem versus in the cloud, and then how they can actually account for those costs if they're bringing a different solution to the cloud that isn't necessarily native in the cloud or consumable as a service through the cloud provider.
So the cloud obviously isn't one ominous, humongous thing. It's got hybrid, multi-cloud approaches. There's vulnerability and protection gaps to take into account with that. So how can agencies protect and manage their data across all these different platforms that they're using?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we see some of the first major cloud contracts that came out, they were single cloud provider, right? So there was only one cloud solution that was available, and there was the capabilities that cloud provider had to offer. But it became difficult to actually have a more comprehensive strategy, and then also even be able to negotiate your cloud cost when there was a single provider. So what we've seen is the government actually introduced a lot of multi-cloud contracts, and those are going to continue to go and deliver. So when you look at the solutions that you're bringing to individual clouds, it's important to have a solution that can actually span multiple clouds, as well as provide you that kind of data protection and recovery from one cloud provider to another. And then also allow you to have a common management interface, so your teams and your training costs are kept down by making sure that you have a single solution that can actually encompass the entire enterprise.
So the cloud allows for greater flexibility in data, obviously, and we talked about how they can keep it on site, they can have multiple clouds and everything like that. But there is this lift and shift approach that you've been talking about with Veritas. And what is that, and why is it important?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of the early cloud adoption was just that. People would take an application from on-premise. They would keep it factored very much the same way that it currently was in its on-premise state, and just try to drop it into the cloud as a virtual machine. What they didn't always get were the cost benefits of that, or the type of auto-scaling that a cloud could actually offer. We see a lift and shift approach as more of a transitory, or a ability for you to take the lift and shift capability and then use it as a just-in-time cloud DR infrastructure, right? So one of the things that we're seeing more and more of the government customers wanting to do is understand how they can operate the applications on premise, and then even just do a DR in the cloud in the event of a reason to bring up the infrastructure. And they're looking for ways and tools that actually automate those capabilities. And it's important that your provider or your vendor that you're using for your data protection actually has that capability to do that automated recovery in the cloud. And that's a way that they can significantly lower cost. So lift and shift, while it's an easy way to transition there, it should be reserved for specific situations or for different strategies, I think, that are appropriate. Otherwise, they should probably invest in application refactoring for being able to optimize and be more cloud native.
And what sort of decision making would go into that lift and shift when you're looking at applications? How do you know which is most important for you to put in there, and how do you come to those decisions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things that we do see is there's a need for being able to account for the cost, right? When you're leveraging only um, the solutions that are available to you through the consumption of the cloud portal, the cloud vendors portal, right, where they can do all the billing, it's relatively easy for you to do the cost accounting. What we don't see is solutions that are designed to be able to do cost accounting that combine the best of what you can bring to your bring your own license to the cloud as well as access the cloud capabilities, right? And that's where a comprehensive reporting solution is really important to be able to analyze those costs associated with the total cost of ownership of an application, both on-prem and in the cloud. Even more importantly, I think if you do have an idea that you want to be able to take a lift and shift approach, being able to understand what that cost is going to be once you do transition it into the cloud, prior to doing that is kind of critical to being able to ensure that you have success with the controllable cost model.
Right, right. And, in general, when it comes to cybersecurity, we've seen a huge increase in things like ransomware. What do companies and agencies need to do to prepare for this attack that's going to end up happening for them?
Yeah, I think there's a few key areas that we have to take a look at, right? Certainly the concept of multi-cloud with a just-in-time infrastructure DR capability where you can fail over from one cloud to another and hopefully do that in an automated fashion. That's certainly going to be critical for that kind of recoverability without incurring massive amount of cost of replicating infrastructure in multiple locations. The other thing is what we've historically seen is you wouldn't see mass outages that could take down very, very large parts of the environment too often. The enterprise infrastructure always had the high availability built into it to be able to protect that. With ransomware, it takes out the entire data source, right? And including sometimes the application layer for that data source. Then your recovery becomes much more wide scale. And what we've seen with a lot of the solutions that are designed to recover from ransomware is while if they had to recover one or two machines, they can do that. And they can do that within a reasonable amount of time. But you need to be able to understand that your data protection infrastructure has to be able to scale out and scale out very rapidly in order to be able to do a large scale restore so you can bring the entire enterprise infrastructure back online, whether it be in the existing facility that it currently resides, just on different sets of infrastructure, or by bringing that other infrastructure back into preparation and doing a restore, or by doing that just-in-time type recovery. And equally important is the concept of introducing immutability into the data protection data storage, right? You need that kind of write once, read many capability for that data set that ensures that it will be available for you to be able to do the wide scale recovery, right? And lastly, what's really important to consider is how your solution providers are actually bringing zero trust technologies into the application layer, as opposed to just having that zero trust from an identity access capability. So does the software vendor actually ensure that there is a trust relationship for being able to write to that backup storage, right? Does it restrict its ability to ensure that nobody else can actually overwrite that or hijack a process to be able to do that? And those zero trust principles are definitely going to be important to examine that it does exist within the software layer and not just be a marketing label.
So, there are so many in government, there's so many programs, technologies, silos, all these sorts of things, especially within the Army alone. I think in its HR has 32 different systems that they're trying to consolidate at this point. So why is it important to standardize right now in the face of all these different silos and stovepipes?
Yeah, the silos have been interesting because the silos also have a tendency to silo off job functions and as well as, personnel. As you move into a more multi-cloud or a hybrid type world where you have infrastructure in multiple locations, standardization becomes key in order to be able to ensure that you have that portability of personnel to be able to support when you do get personnel shortages. COVID has shown us that you can get personnel shortages and have to actually reallocate people to another. If you're not standardized, then you don't have people who are cross-trained throughout the environment. And realistically, I think it's going to be very important that people look at solutions for their enterprise that can be able to span both the on-premise, an AWS, an Azure, a Google, or other cloud provider, and do it with a single solution that allows you to have those personnel trained across the board in a common uniform fashion.
Well, Mike Malaret, thank you so much for your insights today. Mike Malaret is the Director of Sales Engineering for Public Sector at Veritas Technologies, and I'm your moderator, Scott Massioni. You're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.